I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today, we'll take an early look at free agent targets the Steelers need to consider and how they might fit their needs before the NFL draft. All here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase on the Game Time app. All right, Steelers fans, let's get into a few things. We're going to talk a little bit about free agency. Now, I want to remind everyone this is just an early part of free agency because free agency still begins in about a month's time. In between now and then, teams are going to release players. There's going to be new deals struck. There's going to be, ideas that people are going to have. They're going to re-sign players, let go players. The field is going to increase. But I think it's worth an early look at what the Steelers are going to be doing. And we had someone call into our call line asking about that. Here's an old friend of mine, Justin Blumenfeld from Pittsburgh, asking about what the Steelers need to do in free agency.
Hi, Chris. This is your high school chum, Justin Blumenfeld, giving you a call. I was watching the show and just came across a question I thought would be good for you. And a lot of talk about the draft coming up, and we're all really excited, and there seems to be a lot of needs there. But what players do you think we could get in free agency to open up our draft a little bit more so that we don't have as much need for in the top few picks that we have in the top 3 rounds? We definitely need someone in the offensive tackle position, on right tackle, the center, and cornerback that definitely need an upgrade, and whether or not you think we can get one of those positions in free agency rather than needing to grab them with the draft. Look forward to hearing from you, but have a good one. Bye, bud.
First of all, shout out to Justin. Not only did we go to high school together at Taylor Alderdice, Taylor Gang, we also played like Harry B. Davis Little League basketball together. Like, that's a blast in the past right there. I hope you're doing well, Justin. And thank you for calling in. Any of you can call in at 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute, and we'll get you on the show. But to answer Justin's question, and he brings up a very good point, free agency is always very tricky because you're also signing guys knowing what you want to attack in the NFL draft. And finding that balance before the draft is tricky because you could think, okay, well, we got a great prospect here at offensive tackle in free agency. We're going to sign him up. That's a veteran that we know locked it down. Then all of a sudden, you're sitting in your first round pick and you're like, wait a second, the guy that we really wanted in the first round at that position is available. And then you kind of come into a quandary. What do you do in that spot? Well, I think it's one of the balancing, the schedule things that every team has to go through every year. And one thing that teams do, and I think that, the Steelers have done traditionally, the Steelers' philosophy and how they approach that is they want to make sure that going into the draft, they are at least comfortable with each position group, with starters that they know that could go out there and at least hold the line as far as what a starter should be able to bring to the table at that position. And sometimes it's not the case. We've seen that with cornerback play, with offensive line play with the Steelers, over the past several years. It happens there, and it happens to every team at some point in time. But I think the tricky thing about this free agency period is the Steelers will be able to have some money. Right now the Steelers still need to create more money to officially be under the cap. They just need to really cut Allen Robinson, and that'll be that. As far as what they have in front of them, but they also need to make other moves. Patrick Peterson's a good question, Mason Cole's a good question, restructuring guys like Minka Fitzpatrick and TJ Watt, trying to maybe add some void years for the deals for Cam Hayward or Deontay Johnson, things like that. Alex Highsmith, there's all sorts of things the Steelers can do to try to make more space and money right now to make it so that they have money in free agency. But when they get to free agency, Justin brings up a good point. Who do you want? What positions do you want to target, and what kind of players do you want to look at if you want to make sure that you're at least steady in from free agency, and then still leaving yourself the door there to complete your roster with the draft? Well, let's take a look at some things. First, the positions that I think are of most primary importance to address in free agency are tackle, center, safety, linebacker, and cornerback. I'd say defensive line is up there as well, maybe in wide receiver. But if I was to pick five positions, those would be positions I'd be looking at pretty hard. Now, again, doesn't mean you have to address every single one with a full-fledged starter with a veteran experience, but if you're able to nail on enough of these in free agency and at least getting solid veterans at those positions, you'll put yourself in a position where you don't have to pigeonhole yourself into drafting one position. And that's the tricky place that you don't want to be in if you're an NFL drafting team, because if you go into the draft and let's say, for example, the Steelers sign a starting offensive tackle. Let's say they go and get Jalen Johnson at corner and they go and get Patrick Queen at linebacker, and just naming off some big names. Let's say they have a fantastic free agent signing period and everyone knows they need a center. Then guess what? Everybody knows they're going to need a center. And so you want to put yourself in a position as much as you can to have a balanced look so that you at least give the illusion to teams like, hey, they could take that center. Ooh, but they also, really, could use a corner there. They could also use this here and that there. That's the trick that you have to pull off. And it's a very tough thing to do because, eventually you can still get guys like, the Steelers added Mason Cole. If they could have added a center in the last couple years, that was really good and valued more than some of the players that they were adding at different points. I'm sure they would have added it and added that player, and then Mason Cole would have gone to the background, but you want to at least give yourself that chance. So let's go through position by position and just going through some of the top names that are available for the Steelers in free agency. Now, corner is always going to be tricky. We'll start with corner because you can throw out big names like Jalen Johnson and L'Jarius Sneed. I think those guys go for big money, and the Steelers could make a splash there. They could say, hey, let's go get L'Jarius Sneed. Let's go complete this secondary with a number 2 next to Joey Porter Jr. You could still draft a corner somewhere in the middle rounds, and then you'd have that rookie corner with Corey Trice, with Darius Rush, and you say, okay, the future will be somewhere in there, but you have your starting corners and Sneed and Porter as your pillars for your cornerbacks and your coverage there. But let's say you don't want to spend big there. There's still guys like Kendall Fuller, Chidobe Awuzie, Kellen Moore from the Colts. There are guys who are going to be reasonably priced, and again, more people are going to come with cuts. There's options at corner to get there without getting the superstar players. At center, I know that we're all talking about center in the draft, but if the Steelers could find an answer in free agency there, that would also provide them some relief and make it so maybe they don't have to spend on center in the draft class and they can address other positions. And there are good centers out there in free agency as we look at things. Connor Williams for the Dolphins is one of the top prospects there. Not a physically imposing guy, but a guy who's athletic and could fit what the Steelers need with what they probably want to do with Arthur Smith in his zone blocking schemes. Andrew James of the Raiders, Lloyd Cushenberry, a person I used to talk about when he was coming out of the draft. He's in free agency with his time with the Broncos. I also wouldn't overlook a guy like Aaron Brewer, who was an undrafted guy who became a starter. He got his first start while Arthur Smith was the offensive coordinator for the Titans, and he kind of became a good center from an undrafted position. So there's guys there that you can consider. And again, not break the bank type of guys, just guys that if you sign, that you're getting a solid veteran there. Offensive tackle, if you wanted to get there, Mekhi Becton's a guy that hasn't worked out for the Jets, but has a great athletic profile. He could be a guy that you kick the tires on. Trent Brown of the Patriots, another guy there. There's options across the board at linebacker. I mentioned Patrick Queen, but there's also guys who I think will be more reasonably priced, like Jordan Brooks from Seattle, or Josie Jewell from the Broncos, or Willie Gay and Drew Tranquil, both Chiefs linebackers who I think are scheduled to hit free agency here. And then even at safety, guys like Julian Blackmon and Jordan Whitehead, those could all be guys that you could pair with Minkah Fitzpatrick and say, hey, we just got veteran safeties that didn't cost too much money to pair with him, who could play strong safety, be in the box a little bit more, and help in ways that allow Minkah Fitzpatrick to get back to traditional free safety roles. Now, again, the goal here is you're getting experienced guys here in spots that can be more affordable when you look at getting these guys in these positions. Now, when I bring up Mekhi Becton shouldn't be going for big money. That's the whole point here. I'm not trying to find guys who go for huge $20 million contracts. We're talking about guys that probably cost you $5 to $10 million a year at most, pending on the positions and everything as far as the players that they bring in here. But the goal for every free agency period is to set yourself up so that you're going into the draft not needing to bite the bullet, for lack of a better phrase, of and saying, hey, we're going all in for one position because that's the only position that matters in this draft class. Because when that happens, then other teams that know that can take advantage of you. It weakens your trade value because teams know exactly what you're trying to get. It also makes it so that teams that want to get that position as well know that they have to jump over you. And that's where it can be really tricky. The Steelers have to build up their roster again to the point where they don't need that. And that is where, to Justin's question, those positions, tackle, center, safety, linebacker, corner, those are all names that we'll continue to explore as far as who enters free agency and who the Steelers should take a look at. But part of that also requires getting the right players for the right situations, and that includes the situation that the Steelers offense wants to become. We'll talk more about that, especially with the rushing offense and how Arthur Smith can channel that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Stick with us. We still got a lot to discuss. Today's episode is brought to you by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Sometimes we all need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big or small, certain things can really start to get to you, and it's important to let that out, especially as someone who's unbiased in your life. So today, I want to say how I'm really feeling about something. You might even be thinking the same thing because you probably deal with this in your morning commute all the time. I just got back from driving to Charlottesville, Virginia with my partner Noah Hiles to cover Pitt basketball. And while I love our road trips, I cannot stand people who drive slow in the left lane. The fast lane is meant for people to go fast. And when they don't go fast in the fast lane, that makes it harder for me to get around to people in both lanes who are driving slow. Don't be one of those people, because you make me want to talk to my therapist, which I can find a great one at BetterHelp Therapy Online. Go to BetterHelp right now to find better ways to help deal with your problems. Therapy can be different for everyone, and most of us have bigger problems than your favorite sports team or just traffic problems that can sometimes get you off your rocker for a little bit. But if you're thinking of starting therapy today, BetterHelp is a great option to try right now. It's done entirely online, designed to be flexible and suited to your schedule. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's keep it rolling with our topics here. We got another call that I thought would set up a good conversation here. Gary from Danville, Virginia, called in again. We got Steelers fans everywhere to call into this show. Thank you so much. As always, call 412-223-6644. But Gary has a good question about the offense and the direction it needs to head.
Hey, what's going on, Chris? This is Gary Williamson, first-time caller from Danville, Virginia. 434. I got a question. Since Najee Harris has been our running back for the Pittsburgh Steelers, it seems to me that the run game has been getting going the second half of the season, or November or December. My question is, since Arthur Smith he's the offensive coordinator, how long will it take the Steelers to establish a run game or have an identity on offense? Will it be week 2, week 3, or later? Thank you for taking my call, man. I appreciate everything you do, and continue to have
Thank you, Gary. Appreciate everyone who calls in. Appreciate your question. It's a good question. And, Gary is right to an extent. This is, the Steelers have started slow in general, but the run game with Najee Harris has also started slow. You go back to the first 4 games of his career to open up the 2021 season. Most yards he had in the game was 62 in those games. Now, granted, he had 120 in his 5th game and then 80 and 90 in the 6th and 7th games. So it was kind of less of that. But I think when you take an honest look at Najee Harris's career so far, the run does take some time to develop, but it's less about him and more about the surrounding circumstances. Let's look back at each season and look at it, and there's legit reasons for why the run starts off slow. And a lot of it has to do with the offensive line. Remember in 2021, the Steelers lost, Marquise Pouncey retires the season before, that offseason before. David DeCastro was supposed to be part of that season, and he suffers an injury that ends his career. They end up needing Trey Turner along with a rookie Kendrick Green or rookie Dan Moore. That offensive line was terrible that year, and the offense had no idea what they wanted to be with the old man version of Ben Roethlisberger trying to keep things afloat and no deep ball. So you had no offensive line, no consistent passing attack to scare anybody about, and yet Najee Harris still got over 1,000 yards. And yes, it took some time to get there, but I think part of that was the talent was a bit lacking in that situation. 2022, the offensive line gets a little bit better, but not by a lot. And then don't forget, Najee Harris had his foot stepped on and injured. I think he said he had a Liz Frank injury, for the first couple months of the season, and that led to his slow start there. And also the Steelers generally also again had another not good offensive line for most of the season. But then, like he pointed out, second half of the season, things started to turn. When they got out of that bye week, he ran for 99 yards against the Saints, 90 yards against the Bengals, 86 against the Falcons, and then had over 100 yards against the Ravens and caught the game-winning touchdown in that game. So, yeah, he picked up steam in that one. But this year, I think was probably the most clear-cut turn of production that you saw from Najee Harris, and that was when they got to the last 10 games of the season when he sort of took off along with the rest of the offense. But that, again, when you look at why that was happening, it wasn't because Najee Harris just magically started seeing all the holes that were there before. No, there weren't that many holes there before. And in fact, Broderick Jones, if you go back to when he became the consistent starter, that's when things started to change, because him with Sayamala, with Daniels, they started to develop more in the team, and they started to create holes more consistently. And that's what led to the Steelers having the second best rushing offense in their last 10 games of the NFL season. That's second best in the NFL. So I don't think it's been about Najee as much as it's been about the rest of the offense. And some of it also comes down to what Matt Canada was doing as a coordinator as well. Because one thing that has to happen is, and I say it all the time, when you're calling an offense, running or passing, you need your bread and butter plays, and especially in the run game. Run concepts that when you get a certain alignment, you're calling this run and your team knows exactly what to do. You got the offensive linemen who are going to crush their positions, and you know that, hey, in this situation, we're getting 4 or 5 yards minimum. We're gonna be able to go up in there and get a solid gain. And if a couple things spring the right way, it could be a much bigger play. The Steelers didn't have many run concepts like that you could recognize the past several years. There weren't reliable holes that were consistently open for Najee Harris every game, and sometimes the holes can poke out at the last second there, and that's something that people look at and say, well, why didn't he hit that hole? Sometimes that's because the hole wasn't what was designed to be open, and he's looking for something that isn't there because that's what the play call was, and it just didn't work out that way because the Steelers offensive line was getting bullied. But when you saw the offense start to come together, the offensive line improving, the call starting to make sense, and Najee Harris understanding the pace of things, that's when you saw this past year when the run game really took over for the Steelers, because they called the plays where they had their tight ends bring wham blocks, where they pulled their guards to get their offensive tackles to climb to the second level of the offense, when they used the athleticism in their offensive line to create opportunities to get them moving in space so that Najee Harris wasn't getting hit in the backfield. The first contact he was getting with 3, 4, 5, 6 yards downfield, and that allowed for the Steelers offense to get going more on the ground. That's where Arthur Smith has to make more consistent. To answer Gary's question, it's about making sure the offensive linemen are getting to the second level, winning in space, and creating the open lanes for Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren, because he shouldn't be left out of this equation either, to be able to make big plays. And have more concepts that become familiar to these guys and become staples to this offense. Because when you have more run plays that fit that become pillar plays that you can call upon, the one I always point out to Steelers fans who were, big on the 2010s era with Todd Haley, you knew that there was a play where if they had Marquise Pouncey and David DeCastro pulling to one side, you knew they was getting about 8 yards on those plays. And I'm not saying that's the exact play they need to use, but have those types of plays. That will be one of Arthur Smith's biggest challenges, is getting bread and butter run plays that will become central to the Steelers offense to get Najee Harris going. And I think it's something that needs to happen by week 3 or 4. It's going to take time early on in the season to kind of establish things, to get a feel for that. But you want to start seeing that signs of progress early this upcoming season. And that's where having an experienced offensive coordinator who's done this before can make a difference. And if you're sitting there still thinking, well, no, it doesn't matter, Najee Harris hasn't had the superstar year yet, I encourage you to remind yourself of how bad the Steelers' offensive line has been and how there hasn't been a consistent passing offense that has, can take any attention off of him. But then I also urge you to go back and look at Derrick Henry's first few years in the NFL before Arthur Smith arrived. He was there for 3 years. He only had one 1,000-yard season. Derrick Henry was a backup in some of those years. And then when he wasn't a backup, he was, trying to figure out his way as a starter because the Tennessee offense wasn't, really functioning at a high level, and they weren't giving him clean holes to look at. But in 2019 and 2020, they absolutely did. And in fact, those are the 2 years when Arthur Smith took over. And to this day, those are Derrick Henry's best 2 years as a running back. I think that's the direction that Smith is trying to pave for Najee Harris. Not for him to be exactly like Derrick Henry, because he can't be just like Derrick Henry. They're different players. But to get him in position to be able to have more consistent running holes, a more consistent offensive line play that allow him to become one of the top backs in the NFL and turn him into not just the Steelers' respected first-round pick, but a guy that commands respect everywhere around the NFL because he's finally getting the run game and the blocking to set himself up to show just the talent that he has. But part of that is getting the right kind of offensive lineman. What kind of offensive lineman are those? I'll explain more on the other side of this next break here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Well, first, I want to remind you this show is also brought to you by Game Time. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. That's where Game Time is the fastest and easiest way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. You get killer deals on last-minute tickets, and they have a best price guarantee that can't be beat, so you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you're about to have. The Game Time app allows you to book tickets up to the last minute, even if you didn't plan out far in advance. And I don't know about you all, sometimes that happens to me where I'm getting up to the arena of wherever I'm trying to go. I didn't buy tickets, and I'm thinking, I can get better prices at the door. I can maybe find a scalper. This is where Game Time beats both worlds there. They're the best of both worlds because Game Time is an app that you can download right to your phone. You'll see all the prices. You can compare them side by side, see the best prices for you, and you can always make sure that you're getting the right seats. You'll see the view from the seats in the app so that you're not getting scammed out of your money on a last minute ticket sale. And you also get exclusive flash deals on tickets for all sporting events, basketball, hockey, baseball, wherever, comedy, theater. There's so many different things that you can get when you go download the Game Time app today. And again, the Game Time guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less somewhere else, Game Time credits you 110% of the difference. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase, or go to the website gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account, redeem code Locked On for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We continue taking your calls here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's go to Tyler, all the way out in College Station, Texas, who has a question about the type of offensive lineman the Steelers need.
Hey, Chris. This is Tyler from College Station, Texas. Thanks for taking these calls again. My question has to do with Arthur Smith's zone run scheme. Usually with that, you're looking for good athleticism with your offensive linemen. So in your opinion, like who have you seen at the Senior Bowl that you think would be, a good fit with this new offense, factoring in athleticism, skill, demeanor, just all that? Thanks, Chris. Have a good one.
Thank you for the question, Tyler. And that's a great question because that is something the Steelers need to look at here. And getting athletic offensive linemen is very important. Now, here's one thing that I think is always a tricky thing to consider here. Because some people say, well, duh, you want an athletic guy to play a sport. But what we're talking about offensive linemen, there are mauler offensive linemen, guys that can just bruise you and beat you up and just completely destroy you. But then they also aren't great in space. Then there are guys who are great in space who can run and hit, 5-10 yards downfield, but then they can't control if it's just mono and a gap at the line of scrimmage, they're not moving the guy that's right in front of them. In fact, the latter of that description, that was Kendrick Green's thing. Kendrick Green, if you asked him to pull and hit somebody 10 yards downfield, he would do that in a heartbeat and do it so well. But at the line of scrimmage, not as much. And that's where I think the Steelers, they look at their situation and they're trying to, and that you want to find offensive linemen that can do both. Those are the ones that are usually the best players in the NFL when they can both be athletic, hit in space, but also be a monster, just firing out of their stance at the line of scrimmage and moving people that need to be moved to win at the point of attack. So finding both is tough. Now, I will say this, Jackson Powers-Johnson fits that bill entirely. And that's one guy that I think will be, that's why he's going to be the first center off the board. Zach Frazier didn't get to participate. And I like the things I've seen of Zach Frazier out of West Virginia. If he can be that guy, I think he could. I think that he has athleticism. I think that he has strength. He's a guy that could be there and help in a lot of ways. And there's also other positions as well, like tackle, and we'll get to that in a second. But I want to point out the importance of having that dominant athletic center. If you go back and you think back to some of the great centers of the Steelers past, Dermontti Dawson was one of those guys that had it both ways. He could kick your butt right if you lined up right in front of him, and he could kick your butt if he pulled out and hit you 20 yards downfield. That was something that Dermontti Dawson did at an elite level. I remember watching when I was a kid, there was a play where Cordell Stewart ran a long touchdown, and Dermontti Dawson pulled from his center position and became a lead blocker for Cordell Stewart. I think it was like 10, 20 yards downfield. He just mauled some poor safety and paved the way for Cordell Stewart to head to the end zone. I think it was even a playoff game, maybe against like the Patriots or something like that. But point being, having those type of guys makes a big difference. And so, yeah, you want to go get guys like that, but you also want athletic guys across the board, athletic tackles that can be there. You want guys who can pull from the tackle positions, and that's not something that's always been. That's becoming more popular nowadays because people are starting to realize you could use that athleticism in different ways. But people used to just want the tackles who were just basically, hey, we're the towers at the end of the offensive line. You're not getting biased because we're protecting. We're protecting against edge rushers. We're making sure our quarterback has a more comfortable pocket. But that's where I think the Steelers are trying to go, though. They want athletic offensive linemen who can win there, and they've got a few guys already. For example, James Daniels. He's one of those athletic types. He can get to the second level. He can pull and hit in space. He works well doing those things. And I think that he very much fits that. And he's a veteran with several years in front of him, I think, in his career. Broderick Jones shows all of that. That was one of his best things that he showed when he was at Georgia and what he could do. So Broderick Jones is an example of that. I think the Steelers need at least one more offensive lineman like that who can be dominant in space, dominant at the line of scrimmage. And if you get two, I think that makes this an elite offensive line, because I really like what I've seen out of Isaac Seumalo, really like what I've seen out of Broderick Jones, and I think that when you put those along with James Daniels, who I also like what I've seen, and let's say the Steelers get a center and a tackle in this offseason who become really good starters for them, that's the making of an elite offensive line that can be around for several years yet again and set the stage for the Steelers offense playing at the level that Arthur Smith wants, because he'll have that dominant offensive line. And again, at center, you got Jackson Powers-Johnson from Oregon, and Zach Frazier. Tackle, you have a lot of guys that can fit this bill. Marius Mims of Georgia, Broderick Jones' successor, basically, or former partner. He's a guy who he's athletic, he's raw, he's a guy that you could see getting those opportunities. Tyler Guyton out of Oklahoma, he impressed at the Senior Bowl. He's a guy who, I think that when you look at his athletic profile and his size, he could be a person that does that a lot better. Talaiz Fulaga, JC Latham, all those guys, they have those type of skills that you're looking for in an offensive tackle. I'd also put Kingsley Suamataia as a second-round pick who could still be there if the Steelers go get their center in the first round. But athletic offensive linemen are what you need if you want to dominate at the line of scrimmage in today's NFL. And from all things that I've seen, that is a priority for not just Mike Tomlin, but also for Omar Khan and Andy Weidel and the Steelers front office. So don't be surprised if the Steelers double dip at offensive line early in this draft to get two athletic offensive linemen who are young, physical, fast, and can adapt to the situation to be able to be good blockers out in space or at the line of scrimmage, because that will make this offensive line very versatile. That will set up the run game, and then everything else starts to fall into place, which is why, again, I'm emphasizing a whole lot of why the Steelers need to make sure they get it right in the offensive line in this draft class. And if they do, it sets a heck of a table for the next several years to come. We got a lot more to discuss in the Locked On Steelers podcast on the Friday episode and all offseason long. Stay tuned here on the Locked On Steelers podcast on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes. Again, I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com, and find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.